T minus 54 days and counting, and the election 2024 madness is in full swing. Let's discuss.
Daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Wowzers, folks. The madness is in full swing. And the most recent ridiculousness is truly like at a new, and I hate to use this word, unprecedented level. It's just so, I'm exhausted of unprecedented levels of madness. But once again, Trump has proven himself to be unfit for office, incapable of actually answering questions as asked, completely and entirely reliant on the sad little collection of tactics that he always relies on, to the point of sounding like a completely broken record of like wild, absurdly bizarre, hyperbolic, nonsensical claims, weaponized false accusations, which I do believe are two different categories of made-up statements, and petty playground insults. And his really self-aggrandizing idea of the weave, which is word salad of incoherent and garbledy-gook nonsense, in hopes that people will just nod along and get hypnotized by his supposed charming levels of riz. But I digress. Let me be very clear for anyone tuning in for the very first time, and I have to say this so often that I feel like it must get redundant, but people keep coming at me with the completely inaccurate accusation. I am not a blind faith follower and defender or apologist for the Democratic Party. I am not a registered Democrat. I've never voted Democrat. I keep getting accused of that by people who are triggered by my consistent and unwavering criticism and calling out of Donald Trump's obvious shenanigans. So I just wanted to make that clear. I'm not against the Democrats necessarily. I'm not a blind faith, let them do whatever they want either. For anyone who's been paying attention, I am a early adopter of the two wings, one bird critique of American politics. No, that is not reduced down to I think they're identically the same. They are obviously incredibly, remarkably different. And yes, as I've had to explain on multiple occasions, I do currently stand in a sort of loosey-goosey imaginary coalition with them and everyone else who refuses to kowtow and bend the knee to the third grade level ideological bullying of the Trumptopian movement. Because we realize that bullying is a sad and feeble attempt to distract us from their actual motivations. Pins on the corkboard, my friend. If you're new to the show, that means there's a cluster of ideas, plural pins, on the imaginary allegorical corkboard of our studio space. I mean, I have an actual corkboard right behind me, but we don't use it. I don't actually have the time to put up all the pins. It would be covered in pins to the point of being unintelligible. But it's a mental exercise. Join me throughout every episode in connecting the dots in all the different pins. So when I reference to pins that are already on the corkboard, it's my way of indicating we've discussed this before, and I'm sorry I'm not going to go spiraling out of control discussing these issues again now. But let me illuminate some of my points that I meant to reference here. Donald Trump is a flip-flopping hypocrite who has been proven to be a criminal failure at wanting to be a criminal mastermind, who is a transactional, greedy hoarder of power and wealth that obviously completely sold out to get into politics for the allure of power and wealth. He has not fought for the little guys. He has implemented legislation while legitimately in office and doing things that has overwhelmingly been proven to be legislation that facilitates and empowers the agenda of the people that he claims to be fighting against, the ultra wealthy and the corporate oligarchs. He is not what he pretends to be. He never was, and plenty of us were here respectfully calling that out without resorting to petty insults since day one. Now, I've been accused of also resorting to petty insults, but the only time that that's ever even remotely accurate is when someone heavy-handedly comes at me with nothing but empty tactics, and I have to call them out on it and point out to them that all they're doing is being a petty little name caller. And so that becomes my name calling. But I digress. I'm not here to blindly defend Kamala Harris. Do I want her to win the election instead of Donald Trump? Yes. Is that my ideal solution that ends all the problems? Absolutely not. Do I feel that every politician should be more thoroughly vetted and investigated? Not when something comes up, but before they're even nominated? Oh, you better believe it. I'm an investigate them all kind of guy. No one should be on a ballot until we've actually vetted them thoroughly and exposed the problematic issues that make them unfit for office long before they sit in office for several years and then those issues come to light. Pin on the corkboard. There's a bunch of awesome reform that we could be building. Reform that would actually address the logistical and what's the other word I lost the word. But the actual logistical problems that we are facing are not the problems that most of the fear mongering is freaking everyone out about. Perfect example. While yes, I'm sure there have been examples of either people struggling with mental health and or struggling with starvation that have done something horrible, committed something horrible equivalent to what Trump claimed was going on in Springfield, Ohio. There is a very important distinction to be made there. He wasn't speaking the truth. A friend of mine who's very spiritual and usually not very political, who curiously broke for JFK Jr., despite seemingly being anti-Trumptopian, this individual is an acquaintance, not a friend. It's a social media. We need a different word. A social media acquaintance, who posted in the comments under one of my criticisms of Trump regarding the recent debate. And she said, my friend said something to the effect of, I'm not a fan of either of them, but I am a fan of the truth, and then posted a link to an article about a woman in Ohio, I don't think it was Springfield, who was accused of, has not yet been resolved in court whether or not she has been found guilty of. And what is it we say here in America? Everyone's innocent until proven guilty. But I digress. She was accused of supposedly eating a dead cat, or killing a cat and eating it, right? Now, that's not what Donald Trump said. So my friend who did not watch the debate has waded into a place where she's now defending Donald Trump for quote unquote telling the truth without having bothered to investigate what he said. He was not telling the truth. He was building an image of hordes of brown and dark-skinned foreigners devastating all of suburban white Ohio Springfield's pets. And that is literally not happening. That is literally a xenophobic, fear-mongering dog whistle. That alone should disqualify him for being eligible for office, right? But, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting. America has a huge problem with its attachment to and denialism about white nationalism. I mean, America as a whole, not the people as individuals. There are plenty of individual people who are quite painfully aware of this problem. I'm deeply concerned for those who are bending over backwards to minimize and or outright deny the white nationalist movement that is curiously, seemingly at the very core of everything going on at Project 2025 and or whatever they're calling themselves now, and the Trumptopian movement. I'm sorry, but any and all attempts at denialism in this regard are actually aiding and abetting the white nationalist movement in this country. That's a whole nother issue. Pin on the corkboard, we discussed it before, and I'm sure we will be forced to discuss it again. Friends, forgive me, I'm going to keep this episode remarkably short because I'm testing an idea that maybe the shorter the episode, the more audience it'll attract. So join me, please, in an almost daily journey, both forward into the future as we explore and witness this bizarre tug of war that's happening on a double-barreled wedge issue echo chamber. Like, imagine people in a double-barreled echo chamber in which they're all running on a wedge issue treadmill and they're trying to win a war of tug of war. I mean, take all the time you need to figure out what that analogy means. And I don't mean that condescendingly. I mean, and I realize that was weird and complicated and out of the blue. But there's so much to unpack, friends. And the first, I want to end by wrapping up on a note. So, obviously, as is tradition, post-debate about who won the debate has been ongoing. Trump was making up numbers that were physically impossible within moments of the end of the debate, claiming he was getting praise from outlets and, receiving numbers from pollsters that proved he was the overwhelming winner. Physically impossible because those polls were being taken at the time. There were no numbers available yet. And as I called out in real time, as the debate ended, before they transitioned to the post discussion, which I turned off because I don't really listen to that. I listen to the politicians talk and then I share my own thoughts without letting too much of the spin get in the way. I do like to, after then posting my thoughts, tap into all the different channels to see what they've been up to. And I called in real time right then that despite the fact of what we all just saw in real time, live on television, the Trumptopian base will bend over backwards to shove their heads up their own yeehaws to come up with a mythology. Because that's what they're doing. They are shoving their heads in the sand like ostriches. To retcon my previously slightly more vulgar reference. But they're bending over backwards to then shove their heads in the sand and live in a little micro cave of their own making, referencing insert name of philosopher's cave. What was it? Was it Aristotle? I forget. My brain's just not focused there right now. Anyways, to create a completely made-up narrative of what a manly, powerful, authoritative, commanding win he presided over at that debate. And then, in less than 24 hours, he then also backs out of any future debates with Kamala Harris and has spent that 24-hour period quacking and walking and waddling and whining and complaining like a loser. I was trying to work that like if it quacks like a duck. I was trying to borrow from that. If it quacks like a loser, and waddles like a loser and makes a lot of hoopla like a loser, then it's a loser. Because everyone's been like, oh, who won the debate? Who lost the debate? You know who lost the debate? Yet, once again, the American people. Because neither of them got into actual brass tacks of genuine, deep policy discussion. Now, clearly, Ms. Harris tried to go there, but she had to contend with the overwhelming, poo-flinging tactic, which is what Trump does. He just likes to fling poo like you fling spaghetti at a refrigerator to see what sticks. Forgive me for the mixed analogy there, but that's what he does. That's what the word salad is for. That's what he was patting himself on the back either before or after the debate. I didn't quite catch which when I saw the clip, but for speaking in quote unquote the weave. No, friends, he does not speak with some. He's not playing 7-dimensional checkers or 3-dimensional chess. He's not even playing chess or checkers. And then, of course, there was the inevitable, discussion and backlash from one quadrant of the demographic of people who are just tired of the two-party tug-of-war system, of which I count myself one. I just don't align with some of the directions that same, cluster of groups of different thinking are going with it. But fundamentally the one thing we agree over there in that quadrant of those of us who are, many of them are not in coalition against Trump. I am. But that the lesser of two evils tug-of-war is systematically pointless. I can agree with that sentiment, but also I can't agree with, therefore, it doesn't matter which one of them wins. The facts on the ground over the last 50 years prove radically otherwise. Only people who live in the luxury of never really having been impacted by the policies enacted by either party, really, have the luxury. Only people in that position have the luxury of making that statement. As soon as you've been negatively impacted by the increasingly xenophobic policies of the Republican Party, you realize that doesn't really stand up to the test of, the full population of the country. There's a lot of work to be done, friends. And it starts with holding everyone accountable in the same way that we've all united to hold Trump accountable. And there is a growing convergence of people from all disparate quarters of the political quadrant chart. Now, some friends are getting a little too hopeful and also applying their own logic backwards. I got into a weird discussion with an acquaintance yet again. Somebody who assumed a bit too much personal repertoire despite having never met and never really had any personal direct discussions. Where they started talking about weird shifting coalitions that will only come to the best fruition under Trump, despite also not being in favor of many of Trump's policies. And I was just like, bro, you sometimes come off like an anti-Trumper, but sometimes you come off as like some sort of covert undercover agent to trick people into supporting Trump. And at this point, literally, given how I see the broad spectrum of negative impacts that will impact so many people, including myself, very likely, I cannot abide with Trump and his agenda. So I must unite with everyone who is willing to stand in opposition with him and speak my mind about it in that regard. And if you've been on the fence, friend, now is the time to get off that fence. Which reminds me of how hilariously I've been accused of being a fence sitter. I'm not on the fence. I'm the one standing way off the field going, why are you guys all dicking around with fences? But that's another discussion for another day. Put that pin on the corkboard. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, we'll come full circle. Okay, friends, I said I was going to keep this as short as humanly possible, and I've already gone way longer than I actually originally hoped I would try to land a nice landing on. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask of you only one thing, that you pause and consider what we've been discussing, and that you join me in exploring these ideas, not as me dictating to others what must be, but rather as me asking, how can we let some of this go on? How can people continue to aid and abet a xenophobic, ethno-nationalist movement whilst pretending to believe in diversity and things like democracy? Now, I get it, diversity is a tainted word for most people that lean to the right, but there are plenty of people on the left that sort of are not clarifying their alignment well enough for themselves just yet either. But there's so much to discuss and unpack, friends. But I do want to I want to try to reconnect with a thought that I lost the tail end to. The lesser of two evils issue is a catch-22, which is really frustrating for a lot of people because there is no obvious solution to it. And a lot of people come to the conclusion that complete and total abstinence is the solution. Now, let's take a moment and think about when those words have been applied in the past. Has it really worked ever? Sexual abstinence, especially when imposed or artificially constructed as a supposed norm when it isn't. It doesn't work out well when it runs up against the realities of human nature. But when it comes to a political context, right? I don't think that will ever convince a plurality or majority of people to completely abstain from voting. And arguably, that really wouldn't address any of the systemic issues. Now, what I see in the argumentation and in the public discourse and in the debate, even when it's well-intentioned and actually sincere and honest and authentic, setting aside all the nonsensical trolling and all the clickbaiting and all the malarkey tactics being utilized out there by people on all over the spectrum. Because in politics, there is no true righteousness, friend. It's all a nonsense argument. I have yet to encounter a political ideology that is truly 100% pure and righteous and true. It's all marketing. Now, I'm not saying every political party and every bit of political ideology and every little bit of political dogma and every little bit of political legislation is evil with a capital E. No, that's also absurd. Here's what I'm pointing out. We keep fighting over, both verbally and kinetically. I'm talking about long view and history here. We keep fighting over made up ideological constructs. Whether it's organized religion and the dogmatic constructs of what is and is not the divine entity that is supposedly in control of everything, or political constructs as imaginary as religion can be, all of it is man-made. Okay, now stick with me. There's a logic here, and if you're not seeing it yet, then dive into a few different episodes and start collecting the pins on the corkboard and connecting the dots. We made everything up, from economics to organized religion to politics. It's imaginary. That doesn't make it evil or bad or wrong incessantly. See my whole discussion about the way the brain works. It's a mind trip. It's a mind F. But I digress. We keep having these fights, both intellectual and kinetic. And yet, for millennia, not just here in this country, but as a species, for our entire existence, we've been having these fights. And yet, we just haven't found a solution. If we had, we wouldn't still be running on these double-barreled echo chamber treadmills and trying to have a tug of war. to see who's the most righteous and true political party. Do you see my point? And there's a bigger issue here. Where does let's replace the word evil, right? Because this all started with a discussion going on under the thread of voting for the lesser of two evils is still voting for evil. And their conclusion, whoever made that post, whose name I don't have in front of me and I don't remember, I apologize. And I'm not here to call them out anyways. I get this logic, I empathize with it. I just don't see how it solves anything. Their conclusion was, if voting for, then just let's not vote, ever. I'm like, okay, we've literally been building and dismantling systems for millennia. The systems always encounter problems. The corruption always seems to emerge. You know what we haven't done? We have not found the source root of that corruption. And guess what? Just like that old spiritual Zen poem. Is it Zen? I forget where it comes from. It might have been Hindu. I forget which mystic tradition it comes from, but there's a poem about how the secret to the universe was hidden inside of us, where we surely would never find it. And here we are, bashing our heads into brick walls and not realizing we are the divine power. We are the corrupt. Here, let me flip it back to where I was going. Where does the corruption that we encounter everywhere come from? It does not come from a capital E evil externalized force. It does not come from some cartoon character bad guy with lizard skin. It does not come from, do you get what I'm saying? It comes from within us, the human species. It comes from life itself. If we ever want to build a system free of corruption, my entire lived experience has led me to the conclusion that the only way we will get there is if we heal ourselves and each other and the entire human species first. Or at least in tandem with holding the current obvious political problematic issues accountable and issuing reform. But if we only argue and fight and tug of war as we run on treadmills of wedge issue shape that are shoved into some echo chambers, we'll never get anywhere. Do you see my point? I know my analogy is still rough and tumble. This show is real, raw, and radically unscripted, friends. And I hope that despite its flaws, you might see where I'm trying to get to with the questions and the observations that I make. I'm not here to attack or vilify anyone as a human being, but rather to point out that it's pointless to attack and vilify other human beings. We must instead find the empathy and the forgiveness to hold all the problematic red flag craziness to account and heal the root cause beneath it, which is found deep within, not out there somewhere. And on that note, friends, I will bid you a fond farewell. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Please do collect the pins on the corkboard in your own mind and let me know what patterns you find.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.
That still cracks me up.